Okay, as promised, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I am Crystal Orieva. I have the pleasure of being the Senior Director of Programs and Policy for the National Farm to School Network. And I just want to thank everyone for joining our coffee chat today. As you know, if you have joined our other coffee chats, that we're going to be doing one every month. If you are new, thank you for joining and tuning into our coffee chat. Today's topic is rooting our Black youth in our agriculture genius. So, as many of you know, this is Black History Month. And so we wanted to take this opportunity to really highlight the Black community and specifically having this awesome conversation about the next generation. So again, we're asking people to share this video. You can click the share button in the lower right-hand corner and it'll pop up to your profile feed. A little bit about Nfsn, if you're not familiar with our organization. Our mission is, as a network, to increase access to local food and nutrition education, to improve children's health, strengthen family farms, and cultivate vibrant communities. And we do that as an advocacy organization, working on policy, connecting people and connecting people to resources. Now, in October, as an organization, we launched our new call to action, and that is by 2025 that 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. And now we know that is a big, lofty call to action. We know that we alone as an organization cannot do that, right? It's going to take a movement. And so that is what triggered us to launch these coffee series. It's how do we have this continued conversation about shifting power, racial equity, engaging other stakeholders in this conversation to bring them along with us as we try to push towards our moonshot goal, right? Which is that 100% of communities hold power, that racially just food system. So I am excited about the conversation today. We have an awesome advocate and leader in the work joining us. And a little bit about Hanifa, the founding member and education and outreach director for the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network and coordinator of the organization's Food Warriors Youth Development Program. And I have had the opportunity to get to know her through the Equity Learning Lab that some people that are familiar with Nfsn know. We had this cohort that we launched where we had so many people from different levels of experience with equity and in the work come together to do this co-authored curriculum and learn from each other. And I could say I learned so much from you just being in the cohort, your wisdom, and you're one of those people that don't have to say so much in a space, but when you open your mouth, it's going to be wisdom and nuggets that you can take with you. So that's why I reached out and said, I would love to have you join our coffee series. So thank you so much for creating this space and time to join us today.
Well, thank you so much, Crystal, for having me.
You're more than welcome. Is there anything you wanted to say before we jump into questions? I always like to create that space.
Yes, I'm looking out. The sun is shining. The days are getting longer, and spring is coming.
Yes. Come
And I'm
faster.
excited.
You're right. I think we're all excited,
Oh,
right?
yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, this is Black History Month, right? And so we wanted to take an opportunity to have a conversation centered and unapologetically about the Black community. And so I wanted to start first by just having the opportunity for you to tell us a little bit about your organization and that work that you guys are doing, because you're in Detroit, you're community based, and I'm sure the group of youth you work with are predominantly youth of color.
Yes, Black youth.
Yes,
Black
Black
youth.
youth.
So the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, as you said, is a community-based grassroots organization whose work is centered in building food sovereignty, self-reliance, justice, and self-determination in Detroit's Black community. Our work also serves as a model for what Black self-determination can be, not just in Detroit, but wherever we find ourselves. And one of the things that we want to make sure is that the work that we're doing here in Detroit can be replicated wherever we find ourselves. We have several highly visible initiatives and projects, and we also have projects that the community may not be as familiar with. So I'll start with our 7 acre farm because it's probably the most visible. So DBCFSN operates a 7 acre farm in Detroit's largest municipal park, Rouge Park. And the farm is D-Town Farm. At D-Town, we grow food, but we do a whole lot more than just growing food, because a part of our work in reconnecting our people and revisioning agriculture is about growing community, but it's also about growing and healing spirits and souls. So some of the things that happen on a regular basis at D-Town Farm is we offer farm tours. So throughout the growing season, of course, everything we had to pivot because of, COVID. So last season, we did not offer the in-person farm tours, but there was still activity going on at the farm, along with the growing. We were able to still have a small number of volunteers to come and work on the farm, because of course we rely heavily on volunteers to help with the management of the farm. We offer community herb walks at the farm. We have an annual Children's Day celebration. And one of the highlights of our 2019 celebration was a yoga workshop. The children were just a little reluctant initially, but we had a wonderful young yoga instructor who also was a former intern at D-Town Farm. And
Mhm.
she came and she conducted a workshop with the children, and before you knew it, they were all in.
Mhm.
Um, we also have an annual bio blitz at the farm, and a bio blitz is it's defined as a rapid sampling of the flora and the fauna that inhabit a particular area. And in this case, it was D-Town Farm. So we have community herbalists and naturalists who
Mhm.
come out, as well as students and faculty from some of the universities, University of Michigan, Michigan State University. And it's just a wonderful opportunity to engage in citizen science.
Mhm.
So again, part of our work is about reconnecting to nature, which
Mhm.
is so important, because I submit that one of the reasons we see some of the chaotic tendencies of our youth is because they have been extracted, they have been separated from
Mhm.
nature.
Mhm.
And when our children are engaged in the natural world, you can see that transformation take place.
Mhm.
I mean, it's something awesome, and it's something wonderful to
Mhm.
behold. Um, so we have our Children's Day. Then we have our culminating event, which is our 2-day annual harvest festival. And that's just a time where we can showcase D-Town Farm. We have learn shops, music, food demonstrations. I mentioned the farm tours. We have an outdoor earth oven, and we bake pizzas for the children. We have a pizza baking workshop. Then we have vendors, and the entire community comes out, and it's a celebration. And again, it's about growing food, but it's about growing community and growing souls.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that has to be the heart of the work. What you just said is not just about growing food in this work. It's really about growing that community
exactly,
and
exactly,
creating that community.
exactly. And it's about reclaiming
Mm-hmm.
something that was weaponized
Mm,
against us,
yeah.
because our relationship to the land, our relationship to agriculture is a part of who we are as African people.
Mm,
And we never lost that, but it was weaponized, it was used as a weapon
against.
against us. And so part of this work, when we talk about self-reliance and self-determination, is about us revisioning
Mm-hmm.
what agriculture is
Mm-hmm.
for us.
Right. And
It's
that.
in our reality,
Mm-hmm.
on our terms, and through our narrative that comes from our lens.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what DDCFSN is about. That's what our work is about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about it's about mission. It's also about healing.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that we have to remember, and I don't think that we often think about it in these terms,
Mm-hmm.
but we know the dominant narrative of Black folk and agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And that dominant narrative is always through a lens of oppression.
Yep.
And again, that oppression through the weaponization of agriculture.
Yep.
And so when when chattel slavery was ended, there were no therapists,
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? There
Mm-hmm.
were no therapists. And
Right.
so that trauma
Mm-hmm.
was is
Mm-hmm.
still there.
Yep.
And so part of this work is healing
Mm-hmm.
that trauma.
Mm-hmm. That's never been addressed. In that point, we had a coffee chat last series. We were just talking about that point where, because when you just said it is, right? It's not was,
Yeah.
because from the moment of when slavery, from Jim Crow to
Yes.
like to constantly right now, the trauma of seeing
Exactly.
our
Exactly.
bodies laying in the street and watching us being murdered,
Yeah.
right? There's never been a healing process. It's this
Right.
constant trauma that is inflicted.
Mhm.
And what you just said about weaponizing what is
Yeah.
supposed to nourish our body, weaponizing food and
Yes.
the process of creating it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that leads me to this question about what is the history of the Black community in agriculture, because you touched on it a little bit. It's
Mhm.
the history that's been created from the context of America and the history that's taught in a textbook to our children. But if you were asked that question about what is the history of agriculture for our community, what would that look like, or how would you describe that?
So this is the way that I describe it, because again, it's from the lens of reclaiming,
Mm-hmm.
remembering, reattaching. So the history of the Black community in agriculture is one of resilience, cultural continuity, community building, and again, self-determination. And as I said before, although the dominant narrative around their history is strategically centered around how white supremacy used the land and weaponized it against us, even when the land was weaponized against us, we found a way to make it work in our favor.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at, there are countless examples of this. We look at the resilience and self-determination of the Maroons and the communities that they built. These were African people who would not allow themselves to be enslaved. And they found a way to use the land as refuge. They found a way to build thriving communities, resilience, self-determination,
Mm-hmm.
even in the midst
Mm-hmm.
of our ma'afa.
Mm-hmm.
But these are not the things that are lifted up to us.
Mm-hmm.
We look at Dr. George Washington Carver, the father of sustainable agriculture, and what he was able to accomplish. So these are the images of resilience, even when the dominant narrative is the polar opposite,
Mm-hmm.
because we have always found a way
Mm-hmm.
out of no way
Mm-hmm.
to make it work
Mm-hmm.
for us. We look at, and I called, and I have to add this because Dr. George Washington Carver is probably one of the greatest agricultural scientists of the 20th century, and a genius in so many categories. He was a botanist, he was an educator, he was a musician. Dr. Carver, but the greatest was he was a humanitarian. And the work that he did, his life's commitment was in using his gifts and his talents to uplift his people. And so that has to be uplifted
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about the history
Mm-hmm.
of our community
Yeah.
in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
We also have examples of agricultural co-ops such as the Federation of Southern Cooperatives that is in existence to this day. A cooperative that um, is a nonprofit association of Black farmers, landowners, and other cooperatives. And then Fannie Lou Hamer's Freedom Farm Cooperative. And the list goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's there is the African proverb, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, that says, until the lion has its own historian,
Hmm.
the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.
Mm.
And so we have to reclaim
Mm-hmm.
this history. We have to reclaim these stories, and we must be the narrators of these stories
Mm-hmm.
from our lens and from our reality. Because, yes, we know that our ancestors were enslaved,
Mm-hmm.
but as one elder has stated, if our history represented a 24-hour clock,
Hmm.
our enslavement would be but a moment in those 24 hours.
Mm.
So, what were we doing all that other time?
Mm. Yes. Yeah.
And that is the story
Mm-hmm.
that we must pass on.
Mm-hmm. That
We
is
can't,
key.
we can't deny,
Mm.
nor should we deny or run away from the pain
Mm-hmm.
of that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have to understand that it was just a moment.
Mm.
And what did we do coming out of that moment
Mm.
that has sustained us up until this moment
Mm.
and will sustain us beyond this moment?
Mm.
So those are the stories.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the stories.
Everyone watching now, you know why I was like, well, I need someone. I called her, right? Because you are picking up just the wisdom and soaking in everything that she's saying. Because what you just talked about reclaiming
Yeah.
and making sure that we are telling the true story
Yes.
of our people is so crucial. It's so important. That's why they say history is his story. Whoever is writing it
Yes.
claims it. And that's why it's so important. And what you just said about how the, the slavery and us being enslaved as people
Yeah.
was a moment.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's not who we are as a people. It was something that was done to us
Exactly.
before it and after it. And that's why the story of being, of just this, the state of just being Black is such a beautiful story, because in beauty also comes hardship,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And sometimes trauma, because what's beautiful is how you come out of that.
Yes. Yes. And so it's it's also about the completeness.
Mm,
It's about the expansiveness of the story,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and not just bits and pieces.
right.
And so one of the things in working with young people, and not so much with the food warriors, because the food warriors are, they're younger. Food warriors range between the ages of about 5 to 11 or 12. So I don't get it so much from the younger children, but teenagers. So you take them to the farm and you introduce them to D-Town Farm and the work that we're doing, and they get an opportunity to engage in that work, not, not passive bystanders or passive observers, but they get to actually dig in. And so invariably, what's going to happen is somebody's going to say, oh, Mama Hanifa, I thought slavery was over.
Mm.
Teachable moment.
Yep.
Because again, for the majority of them, their first experience with Black people and agriculture
Mm-hmm.
comes from the classroom in a textbook
Mm-hmm.
that that the only narrative is either our enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
sharecropping, or
Mm-hmm.
tenant farming. So I use it as a teachable moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing that I tell all of my young people, if you don't take anything else away from this experience, this is what I want you to take with you and hold it close, because this is something that will allow you to understand why it is you have been led to believe what you believe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing is our ancestors were not slaves. When Europeans went to Africa and stole African people, they did not take slaves. They
Mm-hmm.
took African men,
Mm.
African women, and African children,
Mm-hmm.
and they placed them in a condition of bondage
Mm-hmm.
that we know as enslavement.
Mm-hmm.
If our ancestors had been slaves, that would have meant that they would have totally succumbed to their condition.
Mm.
Had that been so, there would not have been a Harriet Tubman,
Mm.
a Denmark Vesey, a Nat Turner, a Granny Nandy. None of those people would ever have existed. There would not have been Maroons.
Mm.
So our people fought from the very beginning, and we are still fighting now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing that I want them to understand, that we were not slave. Slave is an identity.
Mm.
We were under a system of enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
of captivity, of
Mm-hmm.
bondage. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing that's important for our children to understand, and not just our children, because I've even had adults who have said, I've never heard it explained this way.
Mm-hmm.
When Europeans went to Africa and stole our ancestors, they knew exactly the skills that were needed. And the people that they took out of Africa were geniuses of agriculture. They were not ignorant, they were not stupid, they were agricultural scientists.
Mm.
And so when you present it from that frame, it's like you can see it in their eyes. It's like, whoa, wow. And it takes on a different feel.
Mm.
It takes on a yeah, it develops a sense of what's next. Tell me more. Why didn't I know this
Mm-hmm.
before? And why is it that this is not what I'm being taught?
Mm.
But it's about us taking on the responsibility of ensuring that our children know our story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think too, like to the point we talked about earlier, there's this. trauma, right, that's attached,
Yeah.
um, because of not just what our ancestors went through, but the
Mhm.
constant and continued oppression that we feel and our the next generation of youth are feeling currently. And so what has it looked like for you in your work to break down that trauma when working around agriculture? Have you seen that as like the first step, just like reclaiming the narrative and the story? And has there been other like activities or things you've done that just have helped? Because a lot of times you can connect like gardening and being with nature to helping with trauma. And so what does that look like for you in your work, especially dealing with Black youth?
So again, it's about our children hearing the stories. It's about our children engaging in the work, but it's also about focusing not only on developing young people who can grow and prepare food,
Mm-hmm.
but again, remembering and reattaching our humanity to our relationship to the land. Before the land became synonymous to our oppression.
Mm,
Example, in our Food Warriors program, in October and November, we celebrate traditional African harvest festivals. So the children learn about harvest festivals, about agriculture on the continent of Africa, and how these festivals and these rituals have been practiced for hundreds and thousands of years. They learn how, for example, the sweet potato became a yam. And one of the reasons that we call a sweet potato a yam, which it's not, is because when our ancestors found themselves in this strange land, in these unfamiliar surroundings, just like any of us, when we find ourselves in an unfamiliar place, we're looking for something that can can ground us, can help us to find, or to help us find the familiar. And so when they saw that sweet potato, it was the closest thing that reminded them of the traditional African yam. And so they began to call it a yam. And to this day, we call a sweet potato a yam.
mm-hmm.
It's about, so now the children are learning about the 5 food groups. We're talking about grains, rice, African rice, Oryza glaberrima, one of only 2 strains of cultivated rice. Why, when we talk about rice, do we not know that we were one of the first cultivators of rice? So these are just some of the ways that we break that barrier, that we begin to build um, build a lens of agency, a lens that allows us to go back and get it.
Mm-hmm.
Sankofa, to understand and say, yes, this is my legacy. This is my heritage.
Mhm.
These are my traditions of which I can be proud.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
our organization, and I always like to share the story of the beginnings of DBCFSN because the seed was planted in the work that we were doing at a small African Centered institution here in the city of Detroit in Sortima Institute. And food security was always an integral part of the school's curriculum. And no matter what discipline you taught, every teacher, one lesson a week had to focus on some aspect of the food system. We were fortunate to be able to move into a building, and this was after I began teaching at the school. I think in 2000 or 2001. I
Mhm.
understand from Malik, who is our executive director, that at one of our previous locations, we also had a garden. But we were able to move theory and put it into practice. And we established a school garden. And again, it wasn't optional, it was an integral part of the school's curriculum, and every class participated in the garden.
Mhm.
Um, and we had an after school program called the Shamba Garden Club. And after DBCFSN was established in 2006, the Shamba Garden Club kind of evolved into the Food Warriors Youth Development Program.
Mhm.
So, again, DBCFSN has its roots
Mhm.
in the work that we were doing at the school.
And that's
Um,
crucial. I think the like you said, not making this work, this learning optional. And
right,
because it holds value, just the same way we say these core curriculum of math and reading, like, right, these are not optional, right? And
exactly,
having that opportunity to connect and understand the food system and
exactly,
understand the land and understand because there's so that ties so much into other things, the science behind it, and it gets you back to nature and not making that optional, just weaving that in
exactly,
education is
exactly.
crucial. And so so many organizations are especially right now in the state we are in right now are thinking about how to center youth, right? And so if you were giving advice to an organization, and let's center specifically and talk about centering Black youth,
Mhm.
what advice would you give those organizations in moving in that direction, or even how to start that work in an
Well,
authentic way?
exactly. Well, the first thing is, as I said, it has to be from a space of self determination. It has to be from a space of understanding the totality
Mhm.
of our relationship to agriculture. It cannot begin with our enslavement.
Mhm.
So, what that means is anyone who is engaging our youth in agriculture must have a grounding in the history of African people. Notice I did not say a history of Black people in agriculture. They must have
Mhm.
a knowledge, a foundational knowledge of African history,
Mhm.
because our history and our relationship to the natural world, which includes agriculture, is inextricably linked. And if you do not have that knowledge, then you will not engage our children in a way that is meaningful, liberating, and self defining for them. And I would suggest that if you can't, then maybe you shouldn't.
Mm, that is the truest statement. The truest statement I have with many organizations, because I think sometimes people get so caught up with doing that what's the popular hashtag at that moment, and that they feel like they just need to be centering certain groups or elevating certain groups. But I always tell them, if you really don't want to do that,
Right.
don't.
Exactly.
Like, I won't find it offensive.
Yeah.
I won't force you to, because there's so much harm that you can do
Exactly.
pretending
Exactly.
to do this work.
Exactly. Exactly.
And
And
not
if,
actually doing the work.
right. And if you can't go into it answering the question, and how does this help to liberate us?
Mm-hmm.
Then
Mm-hmm.
again, maybe we shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Again, that ties so much. I think I was having a conversation with Kiana on one of the coffee chats, just that the liberation part is so key, because when
Yeah.
you're building your work
Yeah.
and your mission and your vision, and we had this continued conversation with Brandy when we were talking about the what do you call it, the nonprofit industrial complex, this idea. Now it's tied into success and money
Yes.
and your sustainability,
Yes.
but it was never tied into truly shifting power and the liberation of whatever community you were saying you were working with. Because it's like you're holding the power, you want to hold the power to help a community and to
Right.
dictate what the community needs,
Exactly.
versus liberating all of the resources
Yeah.
so that they can build the world in which they want to live in, the community that they need, and
Exactly.
want to see.
Exactly. We welcome allies, accomplices,
Mm-hmm.
abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need no missionaries.
I need that on a shirt. I need that on a shirt. So next time I see, I'm gonna be
No
wearing that.
saviors.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need no saviors.
No, not at all.
We ourselves can free ourselves.
That's so true and deep. And when we talk about, so we talked a little bit about organizations and how they show up, but we also know, like, having this conversation when we talk about um, Black culture and Black history, we know that the enslavement of our people weren't just people doing this. It has been governed, the government has sanctioned the oppression of Black people in this country. And so when you talk about the government's role in engaging the Black community and Black youth in agriculture, what would you say is the government's role to play in engaging with that next generation? What does that look like?
So for me, I don't compartmentalize it like that. You know, the community and the youth in the community.
Mm-hmm.
It's the totality.
Mm-hmm.
It's holistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the role is ensuring that the barriers that have led to the trauma are no longer there. But we already know that that's a work in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an ongoing work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the land theft that continues.
Mm-hmm.
When we look, just looking at the city of Detroit, um, and the difficulty with Black people who are growers, trying to navigate the bureaucracy to purchase a parcel of land, to grow food, to have a youth program that teaches young people how to grow food, how to be self determining, removing those barriers. But also, it's about us being able to understand that we have to do the both and. We have to do the work to ensure that government does what it's supposed to do to remove the barriers, at the same time doing the work that we need to do to make sure that while we're doing that work, our people are still getting what they need. An
Mm-hmm.
example of what I mean by that is last year, um, on Juneteenth, the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network, along with um, Oakland Avenue Urban Farms, which is, I like to call our sister farm, along with one of our other organizations, Keep Growing Detroit. The three organizations came together and launched a Black Farmer Land Fund. The goal was to raise $5,000 to be able to help a few growers in the city be able to purchase land that they're growing on, or purchase land so that they could begin to grow. We ended up raising over $50,000. And so I think we were able to provide grants to over 30 growers in the city. That self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be fighting on multiple fronts
Mm-hmm.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to keep first and foremost in our minds that this is the work of liberation.
Mm-hmm.
This is the work of liberation.
That's true. And I think that ties into my next question about what would you say that success looks like in this work? Because I think when you're in the nonprofit world, right, we're always trying to figure out, well, what's success? How do we measure success? And so for your organization, what would you say success is? Is that just looking at the liberation of our community when it comes to food, or complete liberation, or how would you guys define what success is in your work?
Success, success, and these are my words.
Right.
Success is, we started in 2006. Our organization was formed in 2006, and we're still here. We have a 7-acre farm. We are developing um, a food commons in Detroit's North End, which is a majority Black community that is fast being gentrified, a community where Black folk are struggling. And here we are about to, this will probably be our most ambitious project to date. The food co-op will again be that um that thing that reminds us of what we can do if we but have the will to. We have um of course the Food Warriors program and success. My um my assistant last growing season was also my third grade student, my
Mm,
middle school student.
mm,
So those are if you have to have tangible successes, but our success is building a new vision for what our relationship to agriculture is
Mm-hmm.
and what it can be.
Mm,
That's how I see success.
yeah, that sounds successful to me. I think we have to move away from these just finite numbers and these
Like, yeah.
things that don't really tell a story. They're not transforming
Yes.
anything as what we view as success, that we move from 10 to 100 and that's the measure. But what you just said, if we're really able to change the way in which Black youth see their relationship to the land and agriculture,
Yes.
that you've
Yes.
just done something that's generational
Yes.
in that, and has such an effect on so many things. Because like you talked about earlier about the trauma, like if you're in like what the work you do with children, if they and youth, if they were into to get into agriculture as a profession or not, healing the way they see themselves with the land because of the history of
Exactly.
how they still see themselves
Yes.
changes them and allows them to lift this burden and see themselves differently and have this confidence in the way in which they move in the world,
Yes.
beyond just if they do this for a profession, but it allows them to see themselves differently. And
And to see another way,
yeah,
to have another option.
yeah,
Because before this work, they didn't know that the option even existed.
yeah.
I have another student, well, former student, who is now at Michigan State University studying nutrition.
Mm, mm,
Would she have been doing that had she not been a part of Insortum, a part of the Food Warriors?
mm,
Maybe, maybe not.
mm-hmm. And
A,
that's the thing. Why
a
not?
4-year-old harvesting a carrot, knocking off the dirt, and eating the carrot.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget my granddaughter. I guess she must have been about 6 or 7, and we were in the garden, and her goddad came by, and she was just so excited because we were harvesting, and she was so excited, and she, I think it might have been an onion, and she pulled that onion up, and she bit that onion, and he said, Hanifa, she didn't even wash it off.
uh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
changing everything. And
yeah,
what you just said too about the opportunity of having options,
yeah.
and it's so crucial because even when we look at this work that we do, and because we've been having this conversation internally about diversification of staff, even at Nfsn and in the movement, and a lot of national and state level organizations that work in traditional like food systems work, and the spaces are predominantly white in the positions. And it'll go back to this thing of, oh, experience. You don't have a lot of they'll say you don't have a lot of applicants of color that come with experience. They didn't either study that in school or haven't had the key internships or all of these things. And it goes back to that introduction for this to even be an option,
Yeah.
a pathway, and knowing um, that you can study nutrition and that there's a pathway for jobs that exist that would tie into that. And also it comes to, on the flip side of that, for where we are right now, is also, I have to say this because I have the platform to do it, is
Uh-huh.
valuing the experience of people,
Yeah.
not the degrees or the paperwork
Yeah.
behind someone's
Mhm.
name. but the lived experience
Yeah.
of people is so crucial and important. That can leave any organization here watching, because that's how we're really, if we're going to transform how seeing ourselves in the work,
Right.
it goes with introducing the generations early, like what you guys are doing, that this is even an option, this
And
work in this field.
yeah. And again, even the valuing piece,
Mm-hmm.
the degrees over the lived experience
Mm-hmm.
is part of that gatekeeping process.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it goes back to we have to do the both and.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because while the whole premise of the myth of white supremacy
Mm-hmm.
is designed to deny the validity of the humanity of African people.
Mm-hmm.
While we're fighting on that front, we are still responsible for building for our eternity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's not an either or proposition for
Right.
us.
It's not.
And we can't lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to do this one, but I'm not going to do that. No, it's a both and.
Mm-hmm.
It's
It is.
a both and.
And I think in this work too, how we have to start also shifting away from this idea of the academic behind it,
Yeah.
and
And
the
what does that mean?
right,
See?
the academics behind it, because it was so, I'll never forget, I'll tell this, I didn't say this in this coffee chat, but in the beginning, this is a laid back, very open and real conversation, so I'll say that now, before I say this story. But I'll never forget when I first started with Nfsn. I might have been in definitely my first month, or if not few weeks. And I had been in some meeting, and it was a partner, and I had mentioned, I was focusing on that conversation about some equity work. And the individual went behind me and called my boss, the ED, to say that, I should try to learn substance that I could add, because adding equity is like, so I don't have substance. The only thing I can add is equity to the conversation. And I was so floored by this, and the idea that I needed to learn more about the food system. And because on my resume, right, like I had a lot of my experience wasn't traditionally in food. And so then we're having conversation about, oh, we can learn more about food. I was like, well, I worked to start the first farmers market in my community. I helped write and health impact assessments. I've been working on environmental justice of getting water fountains in the school system. I was like, my life as a Black woman in my community has been doing food justice work. I've just never been paid to do it.
Right.
I was like, so this idea that if you don't see something on paper, and that if we bring equity and the lens of our full selves to the work, then somehow we don't have expertise, because what you learned in your textbook or the lens you're giving has more value than the lens we're bringing to the table. And that is one thing I've noticed in this work, the idea of the academics or our lens doesn't have as much value, because the perspective that we bring is not from the perspective of the white dominant narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah, this has been an amazing conversation, and I'm just sad it has to end, but I want everyone, if you do not know about this woman, now you do. And we're going to drop information about her organization in the chat, and just want you to follow their work and, pour into their work, because it's not enough just to like. I'm always about donating and supporting the work that's being done, because we want to make sure that they can continue to do the work. And if you are interested in our organization, National Farm to School Network, and the journey that we're on, like I said, we have a new call to action that we want 100% of communities to hold power in a racially just food system. And again, we know that we alone cannot do that. It is going to take all of us working together, and that we want to leverage our network model to do that. How we connect people to policy, people to people, and people to resources. So please like us here on Facebook and follow us on social media. Join our e-newsletter to stay up to date on our next month's coffee chat, and just stay connected to us as an organization, and the work that we're doing. We're excited about this journey that we're on. We know that it's a what people will call lofty goal and not realistic. Some people have said, but when you're trying to transform something, it's not about outlining what's realistic, it's outlining what's needed, and then just doing what it takes to get there. And what's needed is this liberation. What's needed is for every single community to hold power in a system that sees them equally. That's what's needed. Nothing, we can't say 50%, we can't say 30%, because when you lower it from 100%, who is left out? Who is not included? And so it's just our job to work to make sure we get there. I want to thank you, Hanifa, again for joining us on this coffee chat.
And thank you for having me, Crystal. I've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed it.
Yes, do you have any final words you'd like to leave everyone with?
Yes. I think I will leave you all with the same words that I started you off with. Spring is coming. Just hold on. We're going to get through this pandemic, and everyone just continue to be mindful. Continue to know that this too shall pass, and that it's going to be all right. And grow some food.
Yes, it's going to be all right.
Grow some food. Get
Grow
out
some
in
food.
nature. Yes, get out in nature.
I'm still working on my Greek thumb, so I'm gonna need you to help me on that. But I want to thank everyone for tuning into this coffee chat where we're centering Black History Month. But for me, Black History Month is 365 days a year, and I'm asking every organization to not center Black communities during Black History Month, Native communities only through Native Heritage Month, but always center the most systematically and purposely silenced and marginalized groups every single day of the year. Do not wait for special months to highlight and center them and then ignore them the rest of the year. So that is my call to everyone that's tuning in today. Again, if you like the content here, please follow us. If you have ideas and other things that we can talk about on this coffee chat, please don't be shy and reach out. Again, I'm Crystal Orietha. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Programs for the National Farm to School Network. And thank you guys for tuning in to our Nfsn coffee chat.
All right. Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Bye-bye.